You're listening to this sentence right now, and in about 11 minutes, your mind is going to leave without asking permission. Not because you're bored, not because you're tired, because your brain has a second mode of operation, running underneath everything you do, and it switches on the instant you stop paying close attention to anything at all. You call it zoning out, daydreaming, losing focus. For most of history, people treated it like a glitch, a failure of willpower, the mental equivalent of a car idling badly. But here's what almost nobody realizes. Zoning out isn't your brain doing nothing. It's your brain switching to one of the most metabolically expensive, densely connected systems it owns. When you stop focusing on the outside world, something else turns on. And what it's doing back there is stranger and more important than almost anyone assumed. In the early 2000s, a neurologist named Raichle was running brain scans the way most researchers did at the time, looking for which regions lit up while a person performed a task. But Raichle kept noticing something odd in the so-called resting scans, the baseline images taken before a subject was asked to do anything. A specific network of brain regions wasn't quiet during rest. It was active, more active in some cases than during focused tasks. Raichle named it the default mode network, and the name stuck because it captured something genuinely strange. This network appeared to be your brain's default setting, the place it returns to the second you stop giving it a job. Think about what that implies. Attention isn't your brain's baseline state. Wandering is. Focus is the exception your brain has to work to maintain. And the instant that effort relaxes, even for a few seconds, an entirely different, well-organized system takes over. So what is the default mode network actually doing while you're standing in line, staring at your ceiling, or half listening to a meeting? It isn't idling. Brain imaging studies show it's running a kind of internal simulation engine. It replays past conversations. It rehearses future ones. It stitches together memories, worries, plans, and half-formed ideas into scenarios you're not consciously choosing to construct. Some researchers have described it as the brain's autobiographical mode, the system responsible for maintaining your sense of who you are across time, by constantly cross-referencing your past against your imagined future. The network itself isn't a single region, but a coordinated set of them, spread across the front and back of the brain, communicating with each other in a rhythm distinct from the pattern seen during focused tasks. When you're solving a math problem or following a recipe, your brain recruits regions tied to external attention, areas that process what's directly in front of you. The default mode network runs almost the opposite circuit, one tuned to internally generated information rather than the world outside your skull. The two networks tend to work in opposition. When one ramps up, the other typically quiets down, which is part of why deep focus and vivid daydreaming rarely happen at the same moment. You're either looking out or looking in, and your brain has dedicated hardware for each. This is why zoning out during a boring meeting doesn't just produce static. It produces content. You suddenly remember you need to call your dentist. You rehearse an argument you never actually had. You picture a version of next weekend that hasn't happened yet. None of that is random noise. It's your default mode network doing the specific job it evolved to do, keeping your sense of self stitched together while your eyes point at whatever's in front of you. Psychologist Jonathan Schooler spent years studying this phenomenon directly, and he found something that split the daydreaming brain into two distinct categories. Sometimes you catch yourself mind-wandering. You notice you've drifted, and you consciously pull your attention back. But often, you don't catch it at all. Schooler called this second kind mind-wandering without meta-awareness, and it turns out to be the more common of the two. Most of the time your mind leaves the room, you don't even get a notification. You just resurface 20 minutes later on page 12 of a book with no memory of pages 9 through 11 and no idea when the handoff happened. That's an unsettling thing to sit with. A significant portion of your waking life is being run by a system you don't have direct access to monitoring in real time. You're not being inattentive on purpose. You're being handed off to a different mode of cognition, and the handoff itself is invisible from the inside. Schooler ran an experiment that captured this gap directly. He had participants read pages of text while periodically being interrupted and asked a simple question. Were you just mind-wandering? Some participants caught themselves before the probe ever came, pressing a button the instant they noticed their attention had drifted. Others only realized it when Schooler's question forced the issue. The second group, the ones with no internal alarm, comprehended significantly less of what they'd just read, even though their eyes had moved across every line. Their brains had been simulating something else entirely, while their eyes performed the motion of reading, and nothing in their conscious experience had flagged the substitution. This is what makes the default mode network different from ordinary distraction. Distraction usually announces itself: a noise, a notification, a flash of movement in your peripheral vision. But the switch into default mode processing often happens with no announcement at all, because it isn't competing for your attention from the outside. It's already installed as your baseline operating system, waiting for focused attention to relax its grip so it can resume. Here's where the story gets more surprising. In 2010, psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert built a smartphone app that pinged thousands of people at random points throughout their day, asking what they were doing, whether their mind was wandering, and how happy they felt in that exact moment. The results, published in the journal Science, were blunt. People's minds wandered nearly half the time, across almost every activity researchers tracked, and when their minds wandered, they reported feeling less happy, regardless of what they were actually doing at the time, even when the wandering thoughts themselves were neutral or pleasant. Killingsworth and Gilbert summarized it in a phrase that's been quoted ever since. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind, not because daydreaming itself is bad, but because being unmoored from the present moment appears to have a small, consistent emotional cost, even when you're not consciously aware you've drifted. But that's not the whole story, and it would be a mistake to walk away thinking zoning out is simply a malfunction to be minimized. The default mode network isn't a bug your brain tolerates. It's doing genuine cognitive work, and some of that work is work you cannot do any other way. Creativity research keeps circling back to the same finding. Some of your best ideas don't arrive while you're hunched over a problem, straining at it directly. They arrive in the shower, on a walk, right before sleep, in the exact low attention states where the default mode network takes over. Researchers studying incubation effects have found that stepping away from a hard problem, letting your mind wander instead of forcing focus, measurably improves your odds of solving it. Your brain, once it's freed from the narrow task in front of it, starts running loose associations in the background, cross-connecting ideas that focused attention would never have put next to each other. This is the paradox sitting at the center of all this research. The same system responsible for making you feel worse in the moment, according to Killingsworth and Gilbert's data, is also the system responsible for some of your most original thinking, according to the creativity research. Your brain didn't build an internal simulation engine by accident. It built one because rehearsing the future, replaying the past, and making unexpected connections between ideas were worth the cost of occasionally feeling a little less present. There's likely a deeper reason this system exists at all. Planning ahead, remembering who owes you a favor, running a mental rehearsal of a difficult conversation before it happens, these were not luxuries for your ancestors. They were survival tools. A mind that could simulate a hunt before attempting it, or replay a conflict to extract a lesson from it, had a real advantage over a mind that only ever processed whatever was directly in front of it. The default mode network, in that light, isn't a distraction from the important business of living. For most of human history, it was some of the most important business your brain did. What's changed is the environment surrounding that ancient system. Your ancestors' minds wandered while walking, foraging, or sitting around a fire, activities with few real stakes if attention drifted for a while. Today, your mind wanders while driving, while your boss is talking, while you're supposed to be reading a contract. The system itself hasn't changed. The cost of it firing at the wrong moment has gone up considerably. So what do you actually do with a system like this? One that runs without your permission, roughly half your waking hours. You don't need to fight it. That's the instinct most people have, treating every drift of attention as a failure to be corrected immediately. But the research points somewhere more useful. The goal isn't zero mind wandering. It's noticing when it happens. Schooler's own work suggests that people who catch themselves mind-wandering, who develop what he calls meta-awareness, get more of the benefits and fewer of the costs. They can redirect a genuinely useful wandering thought toward something productive, or gently pull themselves back to the present moment when the wandering isn't serving them. The problem was never that your mind wanders. The problem is drifting for 20 minutes without knowing you left. A short pause built into your day, even something as simple as asking yourself, "Where did my mind just go?" a few times an hour, is often enough to convert an invisible handoff into a visible one, which is really all meta-awareness is asking of you. Next time you surface from a daydream, mid-sentence, mid-meeting, mid-conversation, you're not failing at attention. You're returning from one of the most sophisticated systems your brain runs, a system built specifically to simulate, remember, and imagine, while the rest of you goes through the motions. It was working the entire time you thought nothing was happening. You're reading this sentence right now, and somewhere in the last 11 minutes, whether you noticed it or not, your mind already left the room and came back.